Welcome once again. It's time for another very important lesson where we learn a very crucial thing that you'll have to do very complex things. Welcome to the stage, our guest, Arch Rivals. They are not ready to punch each other at this time. As usual, I have removed all of the gearboxes to start from scratch to teach you a new, very useful skill. So you already know how to make half of this because you have learned all of the crucial steps. We know that we need him to stand there for a minute, we need him to punch, and we need him to fall over. You can do all of that. What you cannot do is the back and forth nature of this mascot. So if we take a look into this Sprite section, we've got black guy, white guy, and Sprite! Because I didn't name that one. Name your sprites. We're going to learn why it's very important to name your sprites today. And why it's important to give them unique names as well. So let's just look into the animation real quick, because these guys are identical. They're exactly the same except for two things. Alright, so we have three animations, one of him just standing there, one of him punching, and then it goes back to just standing there, and then one of him falling over, and then it goes back to just standing there. I'm using -11, 0 instead of -1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 would work because it would cycle back around. -11, again, is just the one that says, hey, go to this specific animation of 0. Sequence 0 is the animation 0, so this would work no matter which side it's on. You could use that for everything if you wanted to be specific, but it doesn't matter. Either one works. Just know that that's why that's -11 and not 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter. They both work. And then you can see here in the middle of this animation, it is in fact activating sequence 2. We will get back to that later, just know that it's here. In the middle of the punch, we will be activating sequence 2. That's pretty blatantly obvious. We know that we're going to have to make a sound effect there, so at the very minimum, there is that. And that's all that's important, except for two things. This gearbox sequence is on 0. We're starting on 0 here. And white guy, he has the same animations and everything. There are two differences with him. One is that his sprite is flipped, otherwise he'd be facing that way. And one is that his gearbox sequence is starting on 1. I'll get into that and why in a second. But we need them to do things. So we need, just to start off, we need a gearbox that will let him stand here and then punch. So let's give it a name. Wait, punch, swap to 1. So we'll give it 80 millisecond delay. We'll have a trigger effect. We'll turn off the activate on triggers only because we don't need a trigger. And we will have that effect be to change current animation. Again, you can go way up there to the animation stuff and waggle it to get this, but I know what it is, so I'm just typing it in. And we're going to set it equal to 1, the punch animation. Hang on. He keeps falling down because I forgot to set this back to 0. Okay, so his animations index is now 0. So now he is waiting and punching, and you can see it's just doing that every 80 milliseconds because we aren't actually changing the gearbox sequence. We need to change the sequence on activation and send it to 1. So now, oh, and this also needs to be on sequence 0, because as you can see it's global, so it just keeps happening anyway. Put it to 0. So now, we start on sequence 0. On sequence 0, he waits and punches, and then it swaps to sequence 1, which was what that means. I should just say sequence. Sequence 1, to be clear. So, there's nothing on sequence 1, so he just stands there. And that's all that happens. Now we're going to add one more on sequence 2. This is the one that's getting activated from the animation, if you recall. And this will have a trigger effect, not on triggers only, again, because we want it to activate just whenever. But it's activating from the sequence of the animation, so this wouldn't matter, it would do it anyway. Regardless, turn it off, just in case. And we're going to put in that punch sound effect. It's really quiet, but you can hear it. I'm going to turn down the music, actually, so you can hear it better. Just turn this down to like 30 for a little bit. So we got this punch sound effect, and we're going to play it. Alright, it's working. So the reason that is working is because 0 waits and punches and swaps to sequence 1, so he just stands there and stops punching, because there's nothing on sequence 1. We have 0 and 2 here. Sequence 1 is nothing, so he activates the punch animation and swaps to 1, so he stops punching. The 1 punch animation activates sequence 2 in the middle of the punch to make the punch sound effect. And so far, that's all we have happening. That's it. Alright. And then we need one more to make him fall down. We're going to put this on sequence 3. And this will fall down and then go back to 0 to start over the punchy. The trigger effect, again, no triggers. We want to change the variable current animation in this sprite by setting it to 2. And after activating, we go back to sequence 0. That's all that this one's doing. So if I set this to sequence 3, we will see him fall down, and then it will go back to 0, wait 80 seconds, and then punch. And then it goes to sequence 1 from here, where it does nothing. Alright? Does that make sense? I hope so, because that's all I can really do to explain this to you at this time. So we have 3 sets of things going on here. We wait, punch, and swap to nothing, so it stops punching. The animation for punch activates this, which I didn't name. And then 3 falls down and swaps to sequence 0, but nothing's activating this currently. Just know that it's there. Now here's a fun thing you can do. If we go to the add, clone, copy, paste section here, we can copy all of these gearboxes with the copy all gearboxes button. And then we can go over to white guy, and we can use that same section to paste them in. Now, he's not doing anything, because like I said, he's currently on sequence 1, the wait and nothing happens one. But if we put him to 0, 2, they both punch. And they both make the punch sound. So, that's just to show that these are identical. If we go to 3, he will fall down and then do the punch. Cool, right? Alright. So, we want to keep him on 1 because black guy punches first, and then white guy will punch later. So he's currently just waiting for something to happen. Now, there are only a few things left we need to do. The first is activate the fall. Let's activate it on this sprite first, just to demonstrate this loop of things that is happening. So on the punch sound one, we can add the effect of also fall down. So on activation, this plays a sound, but we can also go into sprite stuff and activate a gearbox sequence, in this case, 3. So now he's punching and making himself fall down. But that's just activating it. It's not actually making it switch to that so that it will change sequence again. So that's not really the thing we would want to do. We want to change the sequence entirely. So get this out of here, and instead change to sequence 3. Alright, so there's a little blank frame there because this is kind of glitchy, but you can see what's happening and what we want to do. We want to change to sequence 3, but not on this sprite. So how would we do that for the other sprite? The same way, except in the other sprite stuff. So in here, we have the option to activate a gearbox sequence on another sprite. So we're going to want to activate sequence 3, which is the fall down sequence, for the other sprite. And also what to do here, we want to trigger that gearbox sequence. But how do we do it? We do it by name. This is why naming is important. We have, if we look back in here, the sprite, and then black guy and white guy. So in black guy here, we want to activate white guy sequence 3. Now, you will notice, if you are perceptive, he did fall down, but he did not switch to sequence 0. There is a quirk in how this works, alright? This is activating the effects of sequence 3, but it is not actually doing the hard work of the trigger section, and the trigger section is where sequence changes are activated. So you cannot actually ignore triggered conditionals and have a sequence get changed. You would have to either activate another sequence in that sprite from that sprite, or turn this off. So if I turn this off, it's no longer ignoring triggered conditionals, and now he falls down and the sequence actually changes and he punches, if you see. But why did that work? Surely there should be a trigger if we're not ignoring the triggered conditionals. The reason it worked is because preemptively, on the sequence 3, we had told it not to activate on triggers only. If this was on, it wouldn't do anything. But since we turned that off, it activates regardless with no trigger. And then, even though it's looking for one, and because it's looking for one, it can see, oh, we also need to change the sequence since this is activating. And that only works because we are ignoring the triggered, or we're not ignoring the triggered conditionals. If we have this checked, it will not check the triggers at all, and that's where the sequence change gets looked for, even though it's in the trigger effects. It's a little confusing. That's like the exception. If you were not changing the trigger, or I mean, if you were not changing the sequence, you wouldn't have to worry about this at all. You could just have him punching and making him fall down until the end of time. If this guy didn't ever need to actually change the sequence, then it would work. But since he does, we want to have this not ignored, and instead ignore it on the thing we're triggering instead. I know that's a little confusing, but the important part is that it works. So if you're having weird fucky, like trying to trigger another sprite and something fucky is going on, try not ignoring the triggered conditionals and then ignoring them there instead. Or make sure that you are ignoring them if you're not trying to have a trigger at all and don't need to change the sequence. Just mess with that. Just know that this, ignoring the triggered conditionals, and the activate on triggers only are kind of linked in that way. So even if we had activate on triggers only on, if we have ignore in triggered and conditionals on, it's going to do it anyway, but it won't be able to change the sequence. But if we have ignore triggered conditionals off, and we want to trigger it even if there is no trigger, we have to turn this off too. So they're kind of linked. Regardless, we're not quite done because he's not punching back, or he's punching back, but black guy isn't falling down. So in white guy here, we will go to the fall down, or the punch sound, and we will finish this off too. Make fall down. So, as well as playing the audio, we need to target the other sprite of black guy. Sequence 3. Trigger the gearbox sequence. And keep in mind, we still need to turn this off, because otherwise he won't ever change sequence. And there you go. Now they are going to punch each other until the end of time. So this has been kind of a crash course on how to activate other sprite sequences, and the little quirk of ignoring the triggered conditionals, or rather, not ignoring the triggered conditionals on the trigger, but instead in the trigger effect of what you are... I don't know why they stopped. I just broke the sound, for sure. Oh, maybe not. Crazy. Anyway, as I was saying, just keep that whole trigger effect thing in mind. You might have it come across as some weird issue you're having, and that might be the solution that you're looking for. Now, very important thing. Why do they keep stopping? There must be some lag going on. They might not like this particular delay. It might be a little too fast. Let's put it up to like 100. It is possible it's just outrunning itself, and it doesn't get there in time. So if we slow it down, it's probably going to be fine. Anyway, so you trigger other sprite sequences by the name of the sprite. And I just wanted to make it abundantly clear why naming things unique names is important right now. So if we clone white guy, and then we move the other white guy up, you will see that both of them are activating, and it's causing a double activation of the other guy sometimes. Every single sprite that is named whatever you're targeting will get activated. you can have two sprites named White Guy that have different gearboxes. And, like, if I, for example, have the fall down not on 3, on this particular one, only one of them will get activated. Or if I choose the other guy and change him to not 3. Like the fall down. Only the top guy will activate. So you can have two sprites with the same name and different effects going on, but note that if you have 2 or more sprites with the same name, and this includes particles, very, very important, this includes the particle system. If you have multiple sprites with the same name getting activated and they have the same effect, they will do the same thing. So if I were to turn on the particle stuff and then the quantity up to 10, I guess, and just like, I don't know, spawn position of a bunch of different places. So now we have all these guys, and all of them activate. Well, wait, was this the one I changed? It was the one I changed. There we go. So now, wow, bad spawn. Now all of these activate. All of them. And you can tell that's a problem because they all have a sound effect activating. Keep that in mind. So if you made a bunch of particles that can be activated by something, they will all activate. You can make them all rotate in the same way, stuff like that. This is very, very, very powerful. I just wanted to make you aware that anything with the same name getting targeted by another sprite will activate. Each one of these can have their own thing going on. Like, let's add a global gearbox for a random chance of rotation. We'll have a trigger, random a chance of, I don't know, like 16. I gotta take that off. I gotta take that off right now. The punch sound, it's bad. Alright, so, as I was saying, we're gonna have this rotate on a random chance. We're gonna change the variable rotation in this sprite by adding 0.1. So now they're all rotating. We want this to be on triggers, though. So you can see that they are all still getting activated by the punch, right? Hang on, no they're not. This was the one, I had it changed again, there we go. So now they're all getting activated by the punch, still. So they will all get punched over and punch back. But now they also have this rotate randomly going on, and they're all doing it at different speeds, because it's random for each of them. So they can have their own individual triggers going on, and gearboxes, independently of the one that still activates all of them. Very, very powerful. This is one of the cooler things, or one of the more capable things to do cool stuff with, so just wanted to make you aware of it. Let's make let's put these on the top. Render in foreground so they're above the wheel, so you can see it better. So you can see them doing their little random chance rotations completely independently at different speeds, because the random chance is different for all of them. But they're also still getting activated by the black guy activating every sprite with the name white guy, and every single particle will have the same thing. I don't know why it didn't activate that time. There must have been a lag spike. Again, it might be the delay is just too short. There will be some quirks you have to work around like that don't always work the way you want them to. But this is the end of this lesson. That is how you activate other sprites from different sprites. It's very similar to just activating the sequence in the sprite itself. You just use the other sprite option and call it by name. And now you know how to make arch rivals. This was a little more of a tricky situation, because of the difference, I mean, they were both basically doing the same thing, except for that targeting white guy and that targeting black guy, but otherwise identical. But I hope that this has sunk in a little bit. If you screw around with it and practice a bit, you'll be able to get better at it, for sure. So just remember that ignore triggered conditionals thing. If you are doing anything other than activating the or changing the sequence, you can use the triggers, or ignore them rather, and it will be fine. but specifically for when what you're doing is also going to change the sequence after, you need to do it this way, where you do not ignore the triggered conditionals here, but instead activate, or turn activate on triggers only off. So, with that knowledge, you know a lot, actually, at this point. We still haven't gotten into chaining, like, complicated effects with multiple triggers happening. Because you can, like I've mentioned before, you can chain these together. Where if you wanted to check one variable with a trigger here, you could have the trigger effect of then triggering another sequence that has its own trigger check. And so, like, if you wanted X and Y to be in a specific, like below, I don't know, 100, so that it was only here and here, you could have a trigger on 2, or 0, for example, being on sequence 0, that checked to see if X was less than 100 and triggered sequence 1, if it was. And then sequence 1 could check to see if Y was less than 100 and trigger sequence 2, if it was. And then sequence 2 would actually make it rotate. That's how the chaining would work to do more complex ideas, and I could give some examples of that in the future, but not in this episode. This video. This video is just to teach you how to activate other sprite sequences, and we have done that, so I'm cutting it here, before I ramble any more about weird stuff that has nothing to do with what we've just learned. I hope you've learned a lot today. In the next video, something more complex, as usual.